Good afternoon, Mark here from Excel, and at what appears to be about 2:15 in the afternoon, I am once again drinking 14% plus South American red wine. So it's a video tasting, and it is in a way a comparative tasting, although I've only got the one bottle here, as you'll see. Quite a lot of these tastings that we do are not just looking at a wine in isolation, they're quite often comparing against something else. So very often we've got a couple of decanter award winners and we compare and contrast so that those people looking at both the wines can get a bit of a feel as to what the two do. This is one which examines whether a new vintage recaptures the glory of a previous wine that's done extremely well in decanter. Now this wine, as you can see, is the Matetic Corralillo Carmenere, and it's now the 2018 vintage. Now in April of last year, in the June edition of Decanter, this wine topped the pops in the Carmenere review, or Chilean Carmenere review, with a very high 95 points, and was one of our highest selling wines ever. It was an enormously plush, delicious red wine that I think just captured many people's hearts, and we saw a lot of people come back and get it again. In November of last year, we sold our last bottles of it. Despite the fact that we got as much of it from Matetic as we possibly could, we sold out. And this is the new vintage, and the question that a lot of people will ask is it as good? And you would expect me to say, of course it is, because you think I want to sell you as much wine as I possibly can, and rather like adverts for soap powders, washing powders, the next one is always better than the last one. Well, we don't always think that, actually. It's where it is the case, we'll tell you, but actually we see quite often that new vintages are not as good. And if you doubt us on that, I can take you a couple of examples. People may remember the Tin Pot Hut Sauvignon Blanc 2016, which was enormously popular. Scored 98 points in decanter, was a runaway wine. The following vintage was thin, dilute by comparison. I'm sorry, Tin Pot, I think you know that. And we didn't sell it, and we were highly reticent in recommending it. Indeed, we didn't. And actually, we see a current one as well. Some of you may remember the Talinay Pinot Noir from Northern Chile, which we were selling last year. Amazing Pinot Noir, absolutely amazing. But the current vintage on sale, which has only just reached us, is disappointing by comparison. It's quite thin, it's quite dilute, it doesn't have the same intensity to it. So we're not recommending that. So we tend to only release these tastings when we think that the new vintage is on a par, of a parallel with the previous. Anyway, let's come back to this. So it is a Carmenere from the Colchagua Valley in Chile. The producer is Matetic, the originally Croatian producer, but now well at home in Chile and produced some amazing wines. Their Gewürztraminer is great as well, but this I think is the wine of theirs that we particularly like. For those of you that don't know Carmenere, it's kind of like a Merlot, but with attitude and with complexity and with a bit of spice, and it's a pretty fascinating all-round wine. I think what I'm about to do is try and pick out where this is similar and where this is different to the 2016 vintage. I will always try and stress the differences because that's what people want to hear about, but there is a danger of overstressing them. And the thing I would point out, and this is the underlying message, is that the 2018 is almost as good as makes no difference as the original 2016. I think this is great. It's there to be liked. And for those of you that are lamenting the disappearance of the 2016, the 2018, will more than make your day. So I don't want to overstress those differences. It is... Yeah, it's still good. It's still really good. To look at it, it's perhaps a little lighter in colour, and that tells you something that maybe it's just not quite as intense, quite as plush, quite as big as the previous vintage. Actually, aromatically, I think it's got a bit more going on. It's a little bit more fragrant. It's a little bit more zingy. It's not as well upholstered, perhaps. It's not quite as plush, quite as full on, quite as rich as the 2016 was. That was a very warm, very hot vintage, and it gave you a great sense of immediate pleasure. This is perhaps just a little more restrained. Its tannins perhaps are better. Its mix of red and black fruit is slightly different, I would say. There's a fraction more red fruit, a little bit less black fruit, but these are very, very marginal differences. And I only know this because I drink the 2016 in some volume actually. Down in my store downstairs, I have more of that 2016 Corralillo than any other wine. It's a younger wine. This is the 2018, whereas this time last year we were drinking the 2016, so this is a little bit younger. I would say that it may benefit from a little more bottle time. It definitely benefits from being open for an hour or two. This has been open now quite a few hours. It definitely, after a breathe, it's extremely good. Flavours, profiles. When I read the review from Decanter last year, it described a pink grapefruit flavour, which I absolutely didn't get. I don't know whether it's the difference in vintage or whether somehow my nose and mouth have changed, but actually there is this kind of citric zing, which is it's not lemon, it's not mandarin, but it's this very attractive sort of grapefruity flavour, which is really lovely. It's got, as you would expect Carmenere to have, quite a lot of spice. I think Decanter last year described it as cloves. Maybe it's cloves. I kind of think it's more nutmeggy. There's a little bit of vanilla there. The vanilla, I'm sure, is coming from the oak. This spent 16 months in French barrels, French barriques, and some of that has definitely transmitted into the wine. There's a slight oaky smokiness, which I'm sure is coming from the charring of the barrels as well. There's a little bit of bottle age, even now, actually, for all of the fact that this is a young wine. There's a fraction of development flavour already coming through on that, and that doesn't surprise me. Carmenere tends to sort of develop an age in bottle quite quickly. So, I suppose to conclude, it's not quite as full as the 16, and you often get these statements of, oh, it's more elegant, it's got more finesse, it's got more structure, and these I think are often euphemisms for a wine that just isn't as interesting, hasn't got the intensity, the thickness. And those examples I gave earlier were classic examples of where they were sort of slightly more diluted. That's not true of this. This has still got a great deal of intensity. If you were compared it with most other wines, you would say, wow, that's a full mouthful of fruit, and this still is. I think probably it's a slightly better wine for the connoisseur out there. It's more structured, it's more put together. It may not give quite as much immediate pleasure, but it's still a fabulous wine, thoroughly enjoyable, and one not to miss.